all here today at our second in the series this term for the Foundational Course Initiative Seminar Series. And really happy to have with joining us Anne Gere and Ginger Shultz to talk about MWrite. And I'm looking forward to this talk, especially because we're going to start with foundations. They're going to begin by introducing us to kind of the basics of writing to learn and the theory that is behind MWrite, and then talk about some specifics of things that are happening here at Michigan, studies that have been done on MWrite, as well as we'll get to hear from some faculty who have used MWrite in their courses and kind of hear about the nuts and bolts and day-to-day of it all. So this is, I think, going to be a great tour of the pedagogy and the specifics. So Anne is the Thornell Professor of Education and English Language and Literature and the Continuing Director of the Sweetland Center for Writing. And Ginger is an Associate Professor in Chemistry and directs a research group in engineering education, or not engineering, in chemistry education, sorry. And they've also brought together our panelists who will join us when it gets to be time for that. Laura Olson from MCB, Mitchell Dudley from Economics, and Brenda Gutterson, who I think is teaching right now, but will be here when that is over to talk about Stats 250. So with that, I will turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just to say a quick word, it's an unusual combination, you may think. English professor, chemistry professor, but I want to say that I think that is part of what's foundational about the work that we're doing, that we're bringing together very different perspectives, very different backgrounds and expertise, and that, I think, creates the kind of foundation that we're able to build on.
Great, thank you. So we're going to start, as Meg said, we're going to be talking about some of the underlying practices that we use in MWrite and what feeds those, and then also some of the research that we've been conducting to help us understand how the role that writing plays in learning in the classrooms that we've been working with. Before we start, I'd like you all to think for a minute about what the very last thing was that you wrote and why you wrote it, and then we'll talk about it. So just take a minute and then be ready to share.
Substantial writing or
anything that you anything that you consider to be writing. Okay. It's your own definition of writing.
Okay, so what did some of you immediately think of writing? What did you last? Well, you started. What did you just write?
Notes. Nice.
Okay. All right. What other forms of writing?
Journal.
Journal writing.
Personal journal.
Personal journal. Okay. Yeah.
Conference proposal.
Okay. Great. Email. Email.
Research paper. I was editing my paper.
Okay. Others?
Post-it notes.
Midterm exam.
Not the one that you're taking, I trust.
No. It's due on Monday.
Okay. Anything else? What do you notice about the array of things that have been mentioned? And what does it say about writing?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, people might think sort of stereotypically isn't real writing, right? You know, we do lots, but it's not, doesn't fit some stereotype.
Yeah. Yeah. I regularly have students who are in writing classes that I'm teaching who will say, you know, I don't do any writing. And then I ask them about, you know, their emails and the various social media that they're part of, and, you know, all the other ways that they are writing every day, but they don't think of that as real writing. I've also run into it, we've just been doing a long-term study of student writers on this campus, and they have what they call writing, and then the other stuff. So writing is what you do in school, and then there's all the other writing.
Yeah, so we like to share this because for a couple of reasons. First, because we all have sort of a different definition of writing that we carry around in our heads, and we also view the role of writing differently. But one thing that is certain is that it's incredibly important in our scholarly work, right? So we have a couple of examples here. Alexander Fleming, as you know, is attributed for the discovery of penicillin. So essentially he had a contaminated petri dish that showed some interesting properties. And he almost lost the attribution for this discovery because he didn't get it out there right away. He didn't write about it right away. So for him, writing was very important. We can also think about Darwin. This is for you, Tim. He drafted The Origin of the Species, and it had been floating around for a while, but it was some 20 or 30 years before he actually put it out. And he did that very quickly because someone else was onto the same sort of thing. So it's very important in scholarly work and in these examples in science. We've done some interviews with faculty. Alina Moon, who's sitting in the back of the room, one of our postdocs, interviewed faculty in sciences from across the country in doctoral granting institutions to talk about their views on writing. And a couple of big important findings. The first one is that they uniformly agreed that writing is integral to their own practice. But in contrast to that, their conceptions of what role writing can play in the classroom differed quite widely. And we thought that that was a pretty stark finding, and so we wanted to understand what it is that keeps them from using writing in terms of their beliefs and other things.
Thank you. Just to say a little bit more about the previous slides, the interviews were conducted with about 33 people, but that group was drawn from a national survey that we had done with the help of ISR here on this campus, which originally went out to about 30,000 people, from which we got about 5,000 responses, 700 of whom were willing to be interviewed, and then so in other words, it was drawn from a very wide and representative sample of STEM faculty from across the country who had this view of writing is important, but for the most part, I don't do it in my classes. Ginger, I'm going to need you to tell me again what I do. This one, got it. Okay. So one of the things that we have to make a distinction about all the time, we being Ginger and I, and those of us who are thinking about MWrite, is the distinction between writing to communicate, writing to show learning, and writing that actually creates learning. And that's a tricky distinction because, as you say, the final exam that you were just creating, that's a perfect example, probably, of writing to show learning. You are going to be assessing that on the basis of students' ability to demonstrate that they know what it is you're teaching them, which is a very different kind of writing from writing where students are actually learning something. And it's that distinction that we have to start. That's the sort of foundational ground that we're building on to talk about that. And so the next thing to say is that it isn't just any writing. I think one of the difficulties that writing to learn has gotten into is that, particularly in the early work that was done, it was assumed that any old writing was good, that writing inherently facilitated learning. And as research has been carried on, it turns out that's really not the case. Not all writing is created equal when we think about its capacity for learning. The kind of writing that facilitates learning is writing that transforms information, that transforms knowledge and turns it into a different knowledge. And it's in that interaction between the writing and the content. So in the case of chemistry or biology or whatever the field, it's taking that information and doing something with it. So it's the difference between, for example, what is the difference between mitosis and meiosis? In order to answer that question, you have to be able to sort of reconstruct information in a way that just define mitosis isn't going to ask you to do, if that distinction is clear. And in a very small scale, that's the kind of difference that we're trying to get to, the writing to learn, as opposed to simply to show that you have learned something. one of the things that I've been involved recently, and in fact the article, I just pushed the button to send it out a week ago, but this is a kind of survey of what's been happening in the field. Really since the late 80s, early 90s, the term writing to learn has been out there in the world. And so in '94, Rivard did a study sort of looking at what was going on. And what he found, no surprise, was that there were all kinds of studies, all kinds of claims being made, but there was not much rigor. People were not describing exactly what they were asking students to write, so the tasks were not well defined. The processes, the analysis, none of it was really very strong. And he wrote in this review in '94 that we really needed a much more solid research base before we could convince, particularly educators in science who count on empirical results, that this is something that they ought to incorporate into their work. Then in 2004, Bangor-Jones and his team did a kind of meta-analysis. They found 46 studies that they thought could demonstrate that there was some learning attached to writing. The thing I find interesting about that is that 30 of those 46 were dissertations. In other words, very few were in peer-reviewed articles, even as recently as 2004. The articles that he was looking at actually ended in '98, so it was that period from '98 back. We just finished another major review, and one of the things that I found interesting was that there was a real turn in 2000, and from 2000 forward, so we did a very systematic review with the help of an informationist in the School of Medicine, who was very helpful in coming up with everything that had ever been published about writing to learn. You know, again, thousands and thousands of articles, but when we got down to it, there were 46 that met our criteria of either experimental or quasi-experimental with the control and the treatment group, and the kinds of assignments that we would count as being truly generating learning. And the difference, well, and all of those, except one, were published after 2000. And so there's been this kind of shift to much more rigorous work in writing to learn. So this is a long way of saying that some of you may have heard about writing to learn earlier and said, yeah, I've heard about it, but it's really not very rigorous. There really isn't much solid information to justify it. But I can tell you now that at least in the field of science, there is a much more, the sort of substantial research base that Rivard was looking for back in '94. I think we're finally at that place. So shall I take this one? Okay. And so what we're about in MWrite is to say, okay, now that we can show that writing to learn is a thing, that it actually is creating learning for students, how can we transform that or translate that into large enrollment classes? Many of you probably know the National Study of Student Engagement, which is administered nationally in many campuses as seniors are graduating. And one of the things that that study looks at are what are called high-impact forms of teaching that engage students in learning, and writing is one of those. And so that's a reason why we think that engaging students, particularly in these large foundational courses, to engage them in writing is to lead for more engaged learning. And so we've been busy. These are the courses where we are currently, well, as of last semester, we're implementing MWrite, and we've actually added 2 this semester. We now have MWrite in a course called Extreme Weather and a course in mechanical engineering. And you can see the numbers of students that are being influenced and shaped by the kind of work that MWrite is doing, and we hope that many of you will join these numbers as you build your foundational courses. Oh, one more, sorry.
I'll just,
So just to give you a kind of preview of what MWrite does, and we'll fill in some more details later, we start from the principle that MWrite should not be a sort of box that we carry around and hand to people, that it should be organically developed. And so the place we start is to say, okay, what are the big ideas? What are the takeaways that you want your students to bring with them as they move on in the field or simply as they leave your course? Let's identify those and then take from those several areas that you think often are particularly difficult for students to understand. For example, when we were working with material science engineering, one of the things that we learned is the phase diagram is really hard for a lot of students to master. And so that became one of the places where we said, okay, let's create a writing prompt because it will target an area that students are already having trouble with. And so we developed prompts collaboratively in the MWrite or Engaged Learning Seminar, which I'll tell you about a little bit at the end. And then we plan some kind of research if faculty members are interested in doing that. Some are, some are not, but we think that we want to keep adding to that research base of rigorous empirical studies that document in many different fields the effectiveness of writing to learn. And then there's the implementation of the assignments, and again, we'll fill in more details about how that happens and why it doesn't mean that faculty have to take on a whole new load of work as part of that. Because we provide, through Sweetland, we provide peer writing fellows who are undergraduates who support the students as they're going through the process of writing, and then we conduct the analysis of the writing that students have produced.
okay, so the key things that we try to do in any of the writing classes that we have are shown to you here. So this is essentially a process, and this is drawn from Vygotsky's social cultural theory applied to writing, and thinking about writing as a way of learning that has social underpinnings. So if you think about this process, there's some prompt that students are going to respond to, some initial prompt that we'll talk more about later. And before they write that prompt, even before that, they're thinking about an audience. They're thinking about who am I talking to? What do I need to say to them? So even at that first point, they're thinking of it in a social way. So that they do an initial draft, they're writing on their own, and then they submit it. And we have an automated peer review tool, and it distributes the assignments, and they do peer review. And so that's where the most obvious social engagement happens, right? Where they read the writing of others, and they get feedback in return on their own writing. They then use that to revise and submit a more finalized draft from there. So that's generally the process that we use. Anything to add?
No?
Okay. So we have a set of kind of best practices that we've come up for creating writing assignments that we try to draw from. And as Anne mentioned, we do this in a very organic way. So we're not coming in and coming up with writing assignments for the faculty. We're working with them to develop the writing assignments. And I'm going to show you an example of one in a minute. But there's a number of things that we have found that are really important. First of all, that they use accessible sources for the students. They provide models or examples. This will, I'll show you how this works out in a specific writing assignment in a minute. It's a kind of assignment that has some sort of open-endedness to it. It causes students to have to make meaning of the content that they're talking about. We specify an audience and a purpose for the writing, and we've learned a lot about the importance of the audience and what that should be and what works well. We always require revision and the peer review that I've talked about. And then we're very clear with students in outlining the criteria that we think is important and directing them towards the learning goals that we want them to achieve.
If I could just add a thing here, thinking back to where we started, asking you what writing is, I think you can see from this list that we're talking about a very particular kind of writing, and And I wanted to underscore the fact that it always includes revision, because those of us who write for a living, which is everybody in this room, know that that first draft is almost always not where you end up. That it's that process of revision and the metacognition that goes with that that's an integral part of the learning that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm going to show you a study that actually underscores that we found in biology. So this is an example, just very summarized, of a writing assignment that was in Laura Olson's class. And she developed this together with another of the postdocs from our project, so Laura Finkelstedt-Quinn. And so essentially, the content, or the key content, were enzymes, right, and their role in biochemical reactions. You'll notice there's a number of things that I just talked about. There's a source, so a Scientific American article was the source that students thought about when they were writing it. And they wrote for a particular audience, a pharmaceutical collaborator. What I want to point out about that audience is that it's a non-expert but educated audience, which is different from writing for a fifth grader or your grandmother or something like that. It relies or requires a certain kind of thinking that might be different. And that's something that we've kind of landed on over several iterations of different writing assignments. And then it has three very clear learning goals here. So not only does it hit on the key concepts that were identified for us, but it actually forces the students to synthesize them together in a particular way.
If I could just add a little comment about the audience. One of the things, in fact, we've just written an article about this. One of the things that we learned is that the audience actually has an influence on the quality of learning and of writing that students produce. And here's the example. We had two assignments in statistics, and one was basically asking students to read an article that talked about the benefits of chocolate for oxidation and therefore why it should or should not be used. And it was an analysis of the study about the extent to which that would be valuable for people who were going to be in a bike race. And the other was they were to read an article that talked about percentages of caffeine, and the assignment was, in short, to write to your grandparents who are concerned about their caffeine consumption. And what we found was that the quality of the learning and of the writing was much less in the letter to the grandparents as opposed to the letter to the experts about chocolate for bikers. And so one of the things that we have concluded is that part of what we need to do for students is to make the audience aspirational, that they are much more interested in being the person who's writing to the pharmaceutical collaborators than they are in writing to their grandparents. And you can think about all the developmental reasons for that, but it was one of those things that we hadn't anticipated and learned from this process.
If this takes you off track, then ignore it, but what was the difference in the writing? Was it simplistic? It didn't deal with the concepts?
Yes and yes. There was a lot of fluffy stuff that really had nothing to do with the topic. So there was that sort of problem, and they were told to write a letter, or no, I'm sorry, to write an email to the grandparents. And many of them didn't do that at all, and they really didn't do much with the content. They would just sort of say, don't worry yourselves about that, was sort of the general tone, rather than seriously saying, okay, if you look at these two studies statistically, here's what you see. There was much less of that and much more of this, talking to their grandparents, but not in a way that was informed by statistics.
My experience is opposite.
Is it?
Whenever we write for our peers, we know what to write. Whenever we write for the news articles, we do not know how to write.
Okay.
We struggle to talk with reporters. We struggle to provide what they can understand. And we got hammered by them about how to write.
Oh, right. But you're talking about us, faculty, not being able to convey our work to a wider public?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very big problem. It's a different issue than the problem we're dealing with with student learning. but that's huge, actually.
Sometimes it's the same thing. You're talking to a less educated audience. If you're talking to an audience that is at or above your level of education, then you know where you're going. But when you're going down, then you have more trouble. And that's essentially what you describe as students having.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
So it's not to say, I think it's not to say that you know, there's necessarily prescription for a type of audience, but that may, perhaps that requires more careful consideration.
Exactly.
Because what you might compare this to instead is thinking about short answer writing in the back of a textbook. The audience there is always an authority. It's always the instructor. So you're telling them that what you want to hear. So the nuance in the audience here is, I think, what is really important, and that we've learned to think about a lot more.
Did you guys look at some of the other assignments besides the ones in stats? I mean, did you look at all?
Oh, in terms of the audience?
In terms of audience?
Yeah, because I was just thinking, one of our other ones, the audience is farmers. And I was curious if, you know, if you had, I haven't looked at that, but whether that would make a difference.
That's exactly, I mean, you know, because there's so many courses and so much going on, we haven't had time to look at every single thing, but it really, I think you're right. That's another thing that we have to keep in mind and keep learning about. We would not have anticipated, we didn't clearly anticipate the difference between the grandparent audience and the expert audience.
It's just such an interesting topic, but one more thought on it is that what we're really trying to get students to do is understand technical terms. And if they are speaking to someone above, they might just use those technical terms without us knowing, do they know what they're talking about? Is that different?
This is not someone who's above. We're talking about a pharmaceutical collaborator.
But who you might be able to use technical terms with without...
But a technical biological term that they might not be familiar with. So, like, let's start. I've used a prompt in organic chemistry, which is what I teach. And so usually we set it up like, okay, this is maybe a physician researcher that you're talking to. They may have had organic chemistry at some point, but they don't really remember much.
So it still requires that explanation of technical terms.
Yeah.
So that's why I used a grandfather or the person on the street, is to get them to think into an analogy. But I see what you're saying, you might lose something there.
Yeah. So there's kind of a balance. There's certainly more, you know, that we can do to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have also seen actually some good assignments that say, you know, take this concept and explain it to a 5th grader.
Right.
And I've seen cases where students have done that better. So, again, I think we still have more to learn, but it's just worth alerting ourselves to that difference.
Yeah. Right. So I'm wondering, do you think it's more that it was write a letter or that it was to the grandparents?
I think it was the grandparents.
Really?
I think so. I think that there was an infantilizing piece in that. You know, for college students who are all about individuation and, you know, I'm going to be a grown-up and independent, and write to your grandparents, I think there was that piece.
Oh,
We're going to get it. It's getting a little bit out of control. We are going to have a panel after this, so maybe reserve some questions for that. I think we have to go on. Maybe we can talk about it then. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so coming back to the assignment. In each of in the classes, as Anne said, we may have a different research agenda, but overall we're trying to understand the role that writing plays in students' learning. And this is, for this Laura's class, for the biology assignments, we kind of wanted to see, you know, we've been really pushing peer review and revision as something as being important. We wanted to understand exactly how peer review and revision affected learning. So we looked at writing assignments, and this is for 4 different assignments in biology, to try to identify misconceptions. So we looked to identify misconceptions in the first and second draft and also in the peer review comments to try to connect them together. And we used this definition of misconceptions. And those of you in education know that there are a lot of definitions of misconceptions. So we landed on this one, which is really just understandings or explanations that differ from what is known to be scientifically correct. So we didn't go for more nuance than that, but that's what we were looking at. So we identified the misconceptions, and then we looked to see whether or not those misconceptions were remediated through peer review and revision. So here's an example for just one of the writing assignments, and this is for enzyme function. That's the assignment that I showed above. And we identified 4 different kinds of misconceptions, and I should say with a lot of Laura's help and, and one of our writing fellows who knew more about biology than I do. And we identified those, and we also noticed some other things. So there were some prompt-specific issues, and some other terminology issues that we noticed. But we did this for 4 different assignments, and that was quite a process. So we can kind of think about the process that might have happened in remediating these misconceptions by looking at the sociogram. So this is kind of a social network analysis kind of map. And each of the circles in this map represents a student and their piece of their writing. And on the right-hand side would be, so hopefully I have this right, on the right-hand side is a color corresponding to their first draft, on the left-hand side is a color corresponding to their second draft, though I may have that reversed. And the colors shown to the left are whether or not there was a misconception and the degree of misconceptions that were there. And then what you notice is that there are arrows. So an arrow goes from the person who reviewed it to the person who received the review. Okay, so, and then green arrow means correct feedback was given, red arrow means incorrect feedback was given. So this just gives you a sense of what we were trying to understand and look at, yeah. So the first thing that I might say is there's a lot of gray arrows. So there wasn't 100% correction of misconceptions, but there certainly was some of this going on this was for the photosynthesis assignment. And most of them led to a change. At least the feedback that was given led to a change, a positive change.
Or a change.
A change, yeah. So this is a more quantitative way to look at it. So the absolute numbers, and this is for each assignment. So you'll see in the columns here for each assignment we have draft 1, so that's the number of misconceptions that were identified. In draft 2, it's whether or not they were remediated. And then we have, were more misconceptions elicited, right? So sometimes, let's say you're getting a piece of feedback and it says, you didn't write enough about X. And sometimes that pushes more misconceptions to come out by the second draft. So we saw that too. And then the last column, what you'll see is added due to incorrect peer feedback. So there was some of that, but not as much. And from that, we came up with what we're calling a success rate. And so what were the percentages of misconceptions that were remediated in this process? So it's not perfect, but it shows it in a really positive direction that students are able to help each other with their misconceptions through the writing process. And what we really want to think about now is how do we amplify this effect? So if we know that this is beginning to work, how do we push this further? What can we do in the peer review process to really make sure that this happens to a greater extent?
Oh, sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I noticed your arrow is 1-to-1, not 2-to-1. So that means each paper is reviewed by 1 peer.
Let me go back.
I misread something.
Yeah, it's multiple. So usually what happens is they give and get 3 reviews on average. It's not always perfect because of course some people don't do it and that kind of thing. But yeah. Okay, so that's just one example of how we've looked at this. So just to transition a little bit, Anne mentioned earlier that we did a nationwide survey of science faculty. We asked them about their use of writing, things, barriers to writing, and then influences for writing. So this is an example of barriers that we asked them to respond to, and you'll notice that this is on a Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Okay, and at the top, these are all sort of what you might think of as beliefs about writing in the classroom. So writing isn't important, I tried writing before but it failed, and that sort of thing. And then at the bottom, these are things that are more practical concerns, right? My class is too large, I don't have enough time, I don't have TAs that can assess writing. And what we've learned from this is that there seems to be more of an issue with these practical concerns than with the beliefs about writing. And so that tells us that if we can begin to address some of these, then it might increase, or we might be able to disseminate writing a bit more. This is you.
Just to add one more thing to that survey and what we have learned from it, the most compelling thing for faculty who choose to incorporate writing significantly in their classes is the social dimension, which gets back to the whole socio-cultural perspective on writing. People who themselves had experiences of writing as undergraduates, perhaps even using writing to learn, and those who had colleagues who were using writing significantly in their classes. That was the population most likely to pick up more writing, to incorporate writing to learn in their own experience, which makes a certain kind of sense if you think about the fact that writing is, certainly it's individual, but it is also a social activity. We never I mean, if you pick up any book, there's always an acknowledgments page, which is about all the other people who contributed to that piece of writing. And I think all of us know that I certainly never send anything out unless other people have read it, and then we get reviews and all of that social dimension of writing that I think for our students is often opaque. They don't think of that as part of the nature of writing. And so part of, again, the foundational thing that we're doing is giving students a broader concept of writing with the kinds of assignments that we're setting up. So I mentioned earlier that one of the things that we absolutely did not want to do was to come forth with an innovation that would say, wouldn't you like to do this wonderful thing? And now here are 10 things you're going to have to add to what you're already doing. And so what we have done, and again, this is the collaboration of the writing side and the science side, because I work at the Sweetland Center for Writing, and I know how valuable it is for students to serve as peer consultants. We have, as you surely know, peer consultants all over campus where students can walk in and get help from their peers with writing. And we know that that is the most powerful kind of learning, one of the most powerful kinds of learning that students experience is as undergraduates. And so we want to take that same experience for students and translate it into this venue. So what we do is every time we're working with a faculty member, so Mitchell is teaching his economics class, and we say, okay, Mitchell, give us a list of the very best students who took the course last semester or last year. And then we invite them, we Sweetland invite them to apply to become peer writing fellows. And then they are required to take a course that Sweetland offers that teaches them what they need to know, first of all, about the kinds of prompts that students are going to be responding to, because these are not easy prompts. You saw the one that Ginger showed you from biology, and all of them are like this. They're dense, they're complicated, they have a lot of parts, and so the peers are first of all taught how to think about those. Then they get instruction on peer review, because many of them have had very little experience or maybe a bad experience with peer review. And so they have to learn about that and how that works and what a good peer review looks like and what a bad one looks like, because they become the monitors in the course. So the idea is that the peer fellows or the writing fellows are sort of that first line of defense between what the assignment is and the instructor. So the instructor is not getting the 100 emails saying, I couldn't upload my paper, my dog ate it, you know, all those things that you're likely to hear from students when there's an assignment due. And so the peer fellows are the people who handle all of that. And then likewise, in many cases, they are also the ones, they're also monitoring to find out who didn't do the work, who turned it in late, all of that. And then each faculty member decides, based again on their goals and what their values in that particular course are, how many points students are going to get. Are they going to get points? Are they just going to get credit? How is this going to figure in the total grade? That's an individual decision. Everybody makes it differently. But the peer fellows are the people then who monitor that. If it's assigning points, they usually, and again, you can ask the faculty members how they work it out individually, but there's usually a way in which the faculty member lets the peer reviewers know, this is how I want you to evaluate. These are the things I'm looking for in this assignment, and you should assign points accordingly. And then likewise with the revision, it's the peer writing fellows who are the ones who monitor to make sure that what's happening is not just turning in the same first draft again, that there is an actual revision and it is actually addressing the concerns. So the peer writing fellows are sort of that core to hold this whole program together to make sure that it isn't something that's going to just become this huge time suck for faculty. The second thing that we've created is this automated peer review system. It's a tool that the developer who works with us has created. It's integrated with Canvas, but it's not. There is a peer review tool on Canvas, some of you may have seen, and it didn't work for our purposes, and so we've created a different one. And that is how we, again, give many students the opportunity to both read each other's writing and to be able to make comments on it. And where we're headed, and this is sort of the next phase that we haven't yet been finalized, is to be able to take the corpora of writing that students are producing, be able to use natural language processing or automated text analysis of that writing to be able to provide feedback to students that say, you know, you're studying economics, but you don't seem to understand this key concept in trade, the concept of comparative advantage, which I might add, our president doesn't seem to understand. Sorry, I didn't say that. But anyway, that's a pretty basic concept of economics. And if students aren't getting that, we need to be able to give them feedback that says, you know, this is something you really need to go back and be sure you understand. So that's where we're headed.
Will it write to Trump? No, I'm just kidding.
So this sort of reviews how we get, and this is a picture of some of the peer writing fellows that we've been working with recently, but you can see this is, you know, they get nominated, they get trained, they hold office hours so that they're available for those questions that undergraduates inevitably have. And because they know the course material, because they're the ACE students from last semester, they know the course material. One of the great benefits, of course, that we learned after the fact is how, again, how valuable it is for them, because they are learning the material, again, differently and in a richer way as they are. I mean, we all know as teachers, we teach and you learn twice. And in effect, that's what happens for all of these undergraduates who are
So, it's a silly question. Do they get paid?
Yes, they do. Yeah, they get paid $1,200 a semester. And, you know, they earn that money, but it seems like a fair amount for the semester.
And get paid to department?
Sweetland pays.
If this was widely used, that couldn't be the cost model. If this was used by every course,
right,
that ain't happening. So
well,
there's
unless we found somebody who was willing to give
I was
Cleveland the
going
money
to
to do
say,
that.
I was talking with development yesterday, because it turns out, and this is actually something I'd love your brainstorming on.
That's a substantial sum.
Alumni, many wealthy alumni are not interested in just giving money. They want involvement. And so one of the ideas that I was playing around with yesterday is that maybe what we could do is come up with a kind of mentoring system where every writing fellow has an alum mentor. And many alumni could afford $1,200. And then they could say, okay, my writing fellow who's in mechanical engineering, and, you know, had that relationship. So I would argue that we'll find a way to make it sustainable.
Does that mean all the LSNA classes are supported for this? No.
We have an engineer over
That's
there
what
who
I
has
thought.
fellows,
And
yeah.
so I just wondered because of the funding source, if it was somehow limited to LSNA.
Sweetland's in an interesting position because we are an LSNA unit, but we serve the whole campus. And I think that's actually a good thing, that we serve the whole campus. Yeah.
Quick question, and I may have missed this. Are your writing fellows also a source of additional feedback, or are they monitors?
So we meet with the fellows. I'm also using MWrite in my class this term, and we meet with the fellows. I mean, it's up to the individual faculty member, but I meet with them almost every week, and we have a conversation about how they're writing. What are the things that are coming up in office hours? It's a fantastic source of information, actually. And I should also add that we're beginning. So Jennifer, who's in the back, is one of the postdocs who's working with us, and she has begun to research what is the influence on the fellows as well. So what are they gaining, and what is their experience with everything? Rachel.
Well, I was just going to help answer the question.
Yeah.
They also, they participate in a class, and they take a class, the Writing Fellows class, and the instructor of the Writing Fellows class also asks them about how things are going, which is also very helpful.
But so something I heard in yours was, do the fellows give feedback to students, or is the peer review happening between one student and another?
No, the fellows give feedback.
To the students.
To the students, and I mean, we have a writing assignment this week that's on an organic reaction, and it's a variation of that, and students are struggling to how to extend from what they already know. So these fellows are having them up on the board and saying, okay, write it out for me, let's talk about it. So they're really having in-depth conversations about it with the fellows.
So I'm really sorry. So this, it seems like you've talked, maybe I'm misunderstanding completely. It seems like you've talked about the early parts of the process in terms of, you know, the peer review and kind of getting feedback to the point of them having a final draft that they're more proud of, although the success didn't seem potentially overwhelming. And that's no critique of it, it's just like giving feedback that students pay attention to is hard. But then you haven't talked about the actual final...
on many of the learning goals.
Sorry?
There is a large size effect in the learning goals from draft 1 to draft 2.
Good.
So it's, aside
Good.
from misconceptions, there are gains
Good.
outside of that.
But then I haven't heard anything discussed about how this big body of work is actually assessed, as in how it's finally graded, etc., which I think is one of the main concerns when one is actually assigning writing in the course, is just that we don't have enough trained help to do this. Are the
fellows help
The
with that.
fellows take,
So they're
again,
also doing the final assessment in terms of the assignment of grades.
every instructor decides how that plays out. As I said earlier, whether you get, some of it might just be, you get 2 points for doing the first draft. You get 3 points for participating in the peer review and doing all of that. And then maybe you get 4 points for the final draft, which the writing fellows are evaluating.
So
And use it, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is a great conversation to have when we have our faculty panel up here,
Good.
because
Right.
each of us has done it a slightly different way, but it does all involve the fellows. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So this should probably talk about this, Ginger.
Yeah, sure. So this is just a screenshot of the peer review tool that we've built. So we have a programmer who works with us, or a software developer who works with us using the Digital Innovation Greenhouse, who built this along with the user experience designer. So this is what the students see, right? And they come on here and they have, so these are 3 of the assignments that they've had, and this happens to be for biology. So if it's due, they come to this window and they can click on the peer review they're meant to do, and it opens it up for them and they see the criteria right along with it. I think that might be on the next slide. Nope, it's not. So this is just to give you a sense of what it is. It's separate from Canvas, but it's integrated with Canvas. So we don't have any of the sign-on issues. And that was a lot of our early problem. We were using an external peer review system, and then the faculty member would get a litany of emails saying, I can't sign on. So we've mitigated that, and we've now worked our way around the Canvas peer review tool, which wasn't great, and we have something that's embedded right in the system. The other thing is, just to tag on to that and thinking about peer review, is that there has been a lot of work showing that peer review not only helps the person who receives the review, but in fact the people who read and give the reviews may benefit even more by critically reading someone else's writing. And this has been shown that they benefit in terms of learning to write, and we're working to show that they benefit in terms of writing to learn, right? That their learning also benefits, not just their writing. So this kind of comes around, I'm just going to keep going. So at the end of that, at the end, we kind of alluded to the fact that we'd like to send students personalized message. We'd like to put more agency into the faculty members' hands so that they can speak directly to the students where and when is possible. And if you're thinking about how might we do that, well, eCoach. So some of you may have heard about eCoach. It's a personalized messaging system It's very awkward to talk about it in front of the person who built it, but here it is. So it's built, originally it was built from the Michigan tailoring system, and I know that's changed since then, and that's happening. But essentially, it takes a lot of information about students, their prior grades. It asks them information about what do you want to get from this course, what are you worried about, and then it also the expertise of the instructors who teach the course and hundreds of students who've taken it before. And it fashions particular and tailored messages to the students. So this is something that we want to leverage and connect to the writing that we're getting from students. So how can we take the writing that students are producing and use that to give messages to them, particular messages in the middle of the writing process that can help them, you know, and amplify what they're getting out of it. So we've started to do this a little bit. We aren't to the point in our writing analysis that we can pull directly from the writing and inform this, but we have begun to send messages through eCoach, prompting students as they're working on the assignments, or helping guide them, I should say, coaching them through the assignments. So this is a message that was sent out in Statistics 250, and this is a course that's taught by Brenda Gunderson. And this was just pointing out to students in a really smart way, because eCoach has behavioral science specialists who help to craft messages that are going to resonate the most with students. So this is a message about peer review, helping students to understand what we just said a few slides ago, which is that they actually benefit from reviewing other students' work and giving them some guides about how to do the peer review. We also have one for revision. So how do you think about doing revision and getting them to think about it in a different way? Yes, Rachel.
Does this go to all the students in the class, or is it for different students at different ones?
They select into eCoach.
Okay.
There's a lot of carrots, I should say, because there's a lot of really great things that eCoach affords them. Maybe Tim wants to jump in. So I think a lot of them are motivated to use eCoach, but it doesn't automatically go. They have to jump into eCoach, respond to a short survey to get information about them, and then they get these messages.
But so everybody who's signed in to receive it would receive this message?
Would receive this message, but there's some tailoring that can go on in a particular message for a student in different ways. This particular message, I don't think that we've tailored a great deal, but we're moving towards that. So they may see some of the same pieces of a message, but there might be individual parts of the message. Let's say that a student in a survey question said that they were not confident about writing. We might adjust what we tell them about writing in that message. So yeah, this is, and those were two things. What we know about peer review is students don't necessarily buy in. They don't necessarily think that they are capable or that they would get of giving good feedback, or that they would get good feedback, but in fact that's not the case. So we want to adjust their beliefs about that if we can. And then also, students have a tendency to think of their original draft as sort of being cemented. They're reluctant to revise it, or as Stephen King says, to kill their little darlings and produce a better draft. So we want to help them to think about revision a little differently.
Yeah, just to add a counsel to what you were just saying, I don't know that many of us think about what it is students are bringing from high school. But if you have children in school, you know that writing is mostly what you can do in 30 minutes on the test, because automated tests have become so prevalent in K through 12 education that the very construct of writing that many of our first-year students come in with, and I'm speaking on the English side, we have to spend a lot of energy disabusing students of the idea that writing is what you do when you sit down and write for 30 minutes. The idea of revision, if they think about it at all, is fix the spelling or correct the punctuation. But the idea of substantive revision, and this is another benefit of this foundational kind of work with MWrite, that it's introducing a different concept of the nature of writing that includes revision.
So thinking about where we're headed, so we have the fellows and the peer review, and we're headed towards eCoach. We have some things that we know that we can say to them, but what we really want to do is be able to tailor those messages based on the writing that we receive. So let's say in biology that we know that they have a misconception about photosynthesis. We'd like to be able to identify that misconception and send them a message that says, you might want to rethink how you're talking about this. That's a little ways off, but I'll show you how some of the early work that we're doing. So this is work by Alina Moon, again, who's in the audience here. So this was an assignment that was implemented in general chemistry, right? So the source or the kind of motivation behind this assignment was you've seen this Facebook post by your friend Ernie Clueless, who doesn't understand climate change. And the goal here is, or the learning goal here, is to help students apply their understanding of chemical equilibria in responding to the student in sort of an argument on response. And it's also explain the data, right? So that's another learning goal there. Okay, so that's the assignment. So we had on the order of 1,000 of these writing assignments, so we have not analyzed them all. We had this great corpus of writing from general chemistry. And we wanted to look at it very carefully and understand more closely how the students formed their arguments and what were the patterns there that helped us to understand what they were learning and what their writing said about them. So we applied, or Alina applied, this framework for cognitive operations. It was adapted from some work by Brian Hand, who's done quite a lot of work in writing to learn, particularly with the science writing heuristic, if you're familiar with that. So after several iterations, she came up with this list of cognitive operations and applied this to maybe 300 pieces of writing. And if you want to imagine what that's like, so it goes from simple to more complex. So a definition could be one sentence, it could be 2 sentences, right? But you get all the way down to an argument, and that could be a complete paragraph or more. And so there are different unit sizes for this analysis, and it's quite a complex thing that she's been working on for a long time. And the way that this works, and the way that to think about this, is that we're assuming here, and based on Hand's work and the work of others, that writing really is a window into thinking, that the writing that you do is linked to your thinking. And each of these writing moves represents a cognitive operation in this framework. And so we began to identify these. And here's an example of how you might think about the complexity of these. So comparison, which is a relatively less complex operation, it has a single domain. It's sort of contained within itself. That someone's going to make a comparison, in this case, between the concentration of CO2 and pH in the ocean. And that they're making a comparison here that they are inversely related. So that's a more simple operation. Getting more complex would be a claim. A claim includes 2 domains where there's both an observation and an explanation linked or related together in order to make a claim. So in this case, they are claiming that there is a relationship between pH and CO2, and they're referring to Le Chatelier's principle of equilibria to do that. So we coded each of these, and in the pieces of writing, I don't know that these numbers are up to date, but they should give you sort of a sense that if we divide these pieces of writing into low, middle, and high tiers in terms of their writing quality, we begin to see some different patterns from the low tier assignments to the high tier assignments, if we just focus in on those. If you'll notice, these are in order of high to low frequency. For the low tier, we'll see that the less complex operations like observation and definition and comparison are more often used in the low tier assignments, whereas with the high tier, the more complicated, more complex operations like claim, deduction, and argumentation are used. So we could see this, and patterns were emerging. We really wanted to understand this, how those related together and what the patterns in a different way. So we looked at using a Markov model. So this is an example of a Markov chain that will help us to understand the sequence. So what operations do they move from? Or so they start with an observation. What do they move from next? So this is an example of a Markov chain, and you can apply this to weather. So there are 3 states shown here in the circles. So there could be sunny weather, soggy weather, which is sort of in between, and rainy weather. And the arrows show basically whether or not it's transitioning from one state to the next. So here we might see how likely it is that you would go from a sunny day directly to a rainy day. And that's given as a probability above each arrow. Okay, so this is an example of a Markov chain that was applied to the low-tier writing assignments. And so what you can see is some of the things that we saw from that initial table. So for example, these 3 lower complexity operations, they have the most arrows going to them, right? So it means that whatever else you've last done you're most likely to go back to an observation or a comparison or a definition. So students are using those a lot, and in fact, their average number of cognitive operations is quite high. So they have 9.7 per piece of writing, right, that they're going to see. And most of them are these lower complexity pieces of writing. Compare that to a higher complexity piece of writing, and you see at the center more complex operations like deduction, argumentation, and consequences, and less of this observation and things like that. So students are more likely to use those. The other thing that you'll notice is the average number of cognitive operations has gone down quite a bit, so it's about half. So they're using less operations, and that's one of the indicators of kind of a more sophisticated argument. Oh, we'll circle those. Okay, so the implications of that, of those studies is that, again, as I said, high-tiered assignments use few higher complexity operations, which were synthesized, and that's in contrast to the lower tier assignments. So they used many low complex operations, which were not synthesized or related together as much. So this is the way that we're starting to think about this writing, and it's a domain general way that we can look at writing, and we don't have to particularly understand the content, which is one of the challenges. And so what we're doing next is to see how we can automate that. Yeah, Rachel.
So would the few high complexity operations, would that be consistent with if you read a piece of writing just generally and it seems concise and non-wandering? Is that what that would be?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to think of it. Yeah.
What it looks like. Coherence, I think.
Yeah.
Not necessarily short, but coherent.
Yeah.
There's really almost a listing, I think, that happens with the lower complex where they're saying, and this, and this, and this.
I mean, it's the same thing that happens syntactically when beginning writers write these endless run-on sentences. It's that kind of thinking.
The other thing that's
we can use this for all sorts of writing. This analysis.
The excitement back there. One of the things that's been a little strange is that the complexity of their writing is not correlated with any other metric that we've seen so far. So we've compared it to their SAT, their ACT, their prior GPA, and things like that. We're just starting to look at the Sweetland's writing placement to see if there's a correlation there. So that tells us something different. Yeah.
I would think it would correlate with what a test that is gone now, but it's the logic part of the GRE.
This sounds graduates, right?
Yeah, I know. But I mean, if we had that, they used to have it for the SAT, I think, also.
It was like the Miller analogy thing.
I don't remember what it was called.
But yeah, you're right. They don't use it.
Yeah, there's tests of scientific reasoning and critical thinking that I wish, we could get. But, of course, we don't have our students taking that right now. So anyway, so that's kind of the last piece of research. And we're going to wind up here and hopefully have time for our panel.
Sorry.
So this is a picture of Anne and I. Anne very bravely came to a National American Chemical Society meeting and presented with me. So this is a picture of us.
And the proudest things on my CV these days are articles in the Journal of Chemical Education.
Which happens a lot. We really enjoyed this. I think that's the magic of what's happening in MWrite is this a true partnership and a friendship here that we enjoy. There's a number of people that we want to thank before we go on to the panel. I do want to point out that Alina is here, and she did the work that's in the back. So Lara wasn't able to make it today. Jennifer's here. We didn't get to talk about any of her work. She's another postdoc that's working on the group. There are many, many undergraduates, not just the writing fellows, but also undergraduates who are working directly with the postdocs to analyze their writing, with which we wouldn't be able to do anything without. The DIG, Digital Innovation Greenhouse, is it even called that anymore?
Part of the Office of Academic Innovation.
All right, I like to call it DIG. There's a whole team of people at DIG that help us with the peer review system and some other things that we're doing. And of course, we have fantastic faculty partners, a few of which are going to talk to us in a minute. And then Larissa Sanyo, she's the lecturer in the Sweetlands that teaches the Writing Fellows class as well. That's been important. And then, of course, funding from the Third Century Initiative and the NSS and the Keck Foundation. Everything. So, Anne?
So, a word from your sponsor. If you you are interested in incorporating MWrite into your class, this is an invitation to participate in a seminar which Larissa and I co-teach, which is designed to prepare you both to understand in more depth. We just did a very quick overview today, but a much more in-depth study of what it means to incorporate MWrite, to learn how to use a peer review tool and so forth. If you're interested in that, I have a few handouts, but here's the website. You can go and apply online. The deadline is sometime like April 12th, I think, for next fall. If you would like to think about incorporating MWrite in your teaching sometime next year, this would be the next step. So thank you. And now we should call our panelists. Mitchell?
Yeah, so while they're getting assembled, please take a minute to maybe walk around and start thinking about, with your table, what are some questions that you might like to ask them now? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Right here at the beginning, what we've asked, we'd like to give them each an opportunity to tell you about the class that they're using MWrite in, and some of the things that they find important about using MWrite, and then we'll open up for questions.
And we should be clear that we told them specifically, don't prepare a thing, because everybody's going to have lots of questions. So it's up to you.
I know what questions to ask.
Okay, because I've been involved in MWrite the longest, right?
Pretty much.
I think so. Spring 2016. This is for Stats 250. Stats 250 with anywhere from 1,800 to 2,000 students, and they are all doing MWrite now, which is absolutely wonderful. We started in spring of 2016, creating the prompts. We piloted it in fall of 2016, doing an honors version of 250, so that anyone who was in honors or not would get credit, honors designation for 250 if they decided to participate in the MWrite portion. So we had a separate MWrite Canvas site for it, and we had about 200 sign up, 150 who actually continued, and 130 who completed the minimum of what we needed to get that honors designation. But that was allowing us to be able to try out those prompts. Now, we did try out the prompts even in the spring term through just a simple pre-lab assignment that didn't have the revision and peer review part of it, but just to try out how they would react to the prompt as another way of testing it out early, piloting it. Then it was winter of 2017 that we took a break and looked at our results and figured out one of the prompts wasn't working quite as well. And in spring of 2017, we then did the whole thing. Everyone was doing MWrite, 200 students instead of 2,000, but everyone did MWrite in the spring term. So we could truly try out the whole process, but it went twice as fast. So we went from 3 prompts to 2 to be able to facilitate the time as well during that time. And this last fall, we ran it with 1,800 students. And this term, we're doing it with 1,900 to 2,000 students. And we learn things every semester as we go through in terms of timing, when it should be started, and how much time you need. And with the 18 and now 20 MWrite fellows that are part of the team. And we have returning fellows who are mentoring the new fellows. So we've got that process going too. And it's been quite good. And I will say, though, it's been an impact not just on the students, but also me. Because my homeworks are now including more writing in them. And it is nice to be able to have that kind of gel better for the students, but not just writing through the MWrite prompts. We've always had them write and interpret things, but not to the extent that we're doing with them right now. In terms of some of the questions being a little more open-ended, a little more conversational or memo format, so we're doing more of that within the homework, so that assessments will be done, but they, of course, don't get the advantage of the peer review and the follow-up and the writing of those students. But I have totally been transformed with how we have our students think and write in this course, and to see some of the students who come in as English majors or not actually liking this math side get excited about these assignments because they're like, oh, I get to actually write something. This is great. So it is really a win-win. It's been a challenge in just organizing all the writing fellows and getting them connected to a lab section that they're overseeing and just some of the logistics. But apart from that, it's been a very good experience.
So I'm in Intro Bio, and this is my 3rd semester using it. We piloted it last winter term. That was some of the data that Ginger was talking about. And that was with a small enrollment active learning Intro Bio course. In the fall term, then, we took it to the full course. about 500 or so. Yorgi was one of the instructors on that one, and we did that with the entire course, and then I'm using it again in my active learning course this semester. And it's definitely different teaching it when I, like this semester and last winter, I had full control of the course. I could, do everything myself. Whereas when I was working with a whole team of instructors and GSIs and a coordinator, it was a lot more complicated to do the logistics of it. But the writing fellows are really terrific. My students at the end of last winter term in Bio 174 asked if they could write some prompts themselves. And asked because they really thought it was very cool, and so I said sure, as long pick a hard topic, and they worked in groups of 2, and I think I got 9 submissions. They had to write the prompt, they had to write the peer review, they had to write the rubrics by which things were going to be graded, and they had to write a sample prompt essay or whatever.
Do they get extra credit for this?
They were allowed to use it to substitute for one of their quizzes. So we don't have any exams in this course, but we had 43 quizzes. So they could substitute it for one of their quizzes. Yeah, we do 1 or 2 quizzes every day in class, and so no exams. But yeah, I was very surprised. And maybe not half, about a third of my class is engineers. And it was actually the engineers that were the first to ask, can we do some of this too? So that surprised me.
That's great.
It also surprised me when Soler and the others did their analysis and found how many misconceptions were in the peer reviews. I thought that was rather interesting and amusing.
I'm Mitchell Dudley. I'm a lecturer in the economics department. As I was watching the presentation, a thought occurred to me. I kind of want to start back before I came to the University of Michigan. One of the universities I taught at previously, I was assigned the duty of teaching one of the writing-intensive courses in economics. And it was at a different academic caliber than the University of Michigan. I will preface with that. But I remember being blown away at the atrocities I was seeing that were submitted by these seniors in college that they called writing. I remember in one case it barely containing any punctuation. They couldn't even follow the basic font size and margins and all that sort of stuff. I asked them to write 5 pages. It was 2 1/4, and it was incoherent. And so when I found myself here and Anne reached out, wow, that would have been probably 2015, early 2016, inquiring if I was interested, and she kind of explained that one of the aspects of this was to try to introduce writing in these large introductory classes without taxing the faculty members significantly. I jumped at it, honestly. I was excited and wanted to hear more because, as the table of showing the various reasons why people didn't incorporate writing in their classes, I was 100% I don't have time to grade 370 writing assignments. I teach 370 on average every semester in Econ 101, fall, winter. So I've integrated MWrite into my Econ 101. The fall of 2016, we piloted it in 2 discussion sections. I basically chose to just grab one of my GSIs and pulled him aside and said, you are going to be because each of my GSIs manages 2 sections. Said, your 2 discussion sections are going to be writing. The other 9 discussion sections will be the normal homework assignments and so forth. And so we're going to see how that goes. And of course, the students weren't pleased when they found out they were in one versus the other, but it seemed to go quite well. That was the fall of 2016. The winter 2017, we scaled up to the entire class, all 370. And of course, we brought on more writing fellows as a result. It's been an interesting process. I think it's been really quite worthwhile. It's been fun to talk to students and think about what we do. I designed my writing prompts around one really big idea for me personally in economics. Too many students finish economics and don't see the relevancy. What? You don't see the relevancy? open a newspaper. And so that's what we did. Every one of the writing assignments is a newspaper article and asking them to take that, assimilate that information and respond to that information. And so it could be anything. It could be, you know, we actually just drafted a new one because there was an old prompt that was clunky. And so they're responding to an article about a proposed policy in San Francisco and writing to the Board of Supervisors of San Francisco. And as an economist, explaining the models behind this policy and explaining why this is a good or bad policy, depending on how they're assessing. And so I leave it to them to figure out if the models suggest it's a good or bad policy. I'm looking forward to see. They're literally submitting the rough draft of that this Friday. I can't wait to see where they fall on that. But we've been doing this for a few semesters now. It's fun. I will say selfishly, one of my favorite parts of this that's completely separate of all of this, I teach large classes. I teach 370 in my principals. I teach 200 in my elective. So working with these writing fellows is one of the few times I actually get to know really well 10 or 11 students at the undergraduate level, and I love that. I finished last year, and I looked at my wife and I said, that was the best semester I've had at the University of Michigan. And a lot of that has to do with, I normally deal with, when I meet with a student face-to-face, it's a complaint of some fashion. But now I have 11 students that I meet with on a regular basis that we're getting to talk about ideas and really grow in economics. It's just fun. It's just fun.
So now it's time for questions.
Could one of you talk about the time scale for each assignment? So things are released, they have time to write it, they have time to do the peer evaluation, they have time to do the second draft.
I think it would make sense probably for each of us to take a turn in that because we're probably all different.
We did learn from semester to semester the need of time so that the writing fellows can grade the initial submission in time to have that feedback from the students along with the peer reviews at the same time so they can do the revision themselves. First time we did a prompt before exam 1, between exam 1 and exam 2, and then after exam 2, just to kind of space it out and not be looking at the exam time. One of the prompts was a little more clunky, and so we took that one out, and we needed a little bit more space. So they have a week to do an initial submission, and ours, it's not a 3-page paper, 5-page, I mean, it's small, memorandum of 350 to 500 words, but it's a week to do the initial, with the prompt out there. Then they get a week to do the peer review, where they get those 3 reviews to look at and get that feedback then at the end of that week. And then the first one, we had just 1 week for the revision. That was timing-wise really well after the exam was done, and before spring break. So we just came through. And then this next one, we're going to have a little extra long revision time because the board exam is coming and making sure they have some time around to do that. So it's about a week for each part, with for the second prompt a little longer for the revision piece of those 2 prompts.
I think for mine, when I worked with Soler to set these up, she recommended about a 2-week period, start to finish, and that's what we have done. I have a little bit heavier on the initial prompt so that they really get that going, and then I don't remember, say 3 or 4 days for peer review and 3 or 4 days or something for the final revision. And I am trying, this semester, my prompts are not closely related to where they are, where the topic is taught in the semester. And so, for instance, we're doing telomerase and enzymes now, but enzymes were covered in late January. And so we're moving things around a little bit to see if that makes a difference. But I think it is better to have some space between them. We don't have as much space between them just for other logistic reasons this term, but basically a 2-week period.
I operate on basically the same scale, 2 weeks, a week for the rough draft, first draft, peer reviews, 3 or 4 days, and then whatever's remaining in the 2 weeks is for the revised draft. I have 5 writing assignments as opposed to 2 or 3, and so the 2 weeks, as you pointed out, Soler and I, as we work together on our prompts, we had kind of come to this idea of 2 weeks, but also because I have 5 different writing prompts, time-wise, just the logistics of it, I try not to, like, across a break, I try never to have something out in the students' hands across a break, because I'm a fervent believer that breaks are important for all of us. So that also means logistically, the topic they're writing on right now, they learned the relevant material 2 weeks ago. So it's a little bit of a time delay in that sense.
I have a question about how you transition a course that's already in existence to an MWrite course. So if I have, mine's a relatively small foundational course, about 100 students, and I already have all sorts of assignments lined up. I started integrating essays into, I have a short answer, but an actual one-page essay into 2 exams. And I grade all of them. It's a whole weekend each, and I would love to transition that to something that, but I do it only because that is where I really see the atrocities, as well as do they really get it or not. It's where I really see that, and they learn in doing it. But how do you transition to did you have existing assignments that now you're just writing out, or do you create new assignments? Like,
I substituted. So I had a homework assignment problem set every couple of weeks.
okay.
And basically, given the scale of the class, I graded that on did you make earnest effort in this, not did you get each problem right. And so when I moved into MWrite, I set those aside. They're actually on Canvas, so the students still have access to them and can tinker around with them as practice problems if they want. But I took that away and put the writing into place. But I will admit that in that process, I also restructured the grading scale. And that was kind of a trial and error process. Originally, the homeworks were 10% of the grade. I made the writing 10 or so % of the grade when I swapped them out. And then we found that we were grading again on this, did you make some earnest effort in this process? And a lot of students were just phoning it in because we weren't actually grading on substance. And so we started introducing a little bit of this kind of substance grading, but that meant scaling up the value. So I've had to trim some of the exams to compensate in that process.
We did the pilot, so students had the option to add that extra piece on initially. Then we brought it in as an existing pre-lab assignment, so just substituted in one of the other assignments that they were going to do anyway. And now it is a separate component that we've had to tinker in terms of what % of the grades coming from what. But MWrite now is the writing piece that wasn't there before, is added in. We had them still write in homework and on exams to extent, but it's a little more structured in that addressing of that prompt. That's better for our class.
We did. Well, I mean, we wrote new prompts and to make it follow the right structure and all that. So it was just added into the class. I mean, they don't know what was there before, so they just appear that semester, and now they've got writing.
Yeah, that transition semester where I had like 2 sections that were doing the writing and the other sections were doing the homework. That was the hardest semester because I had really angry students in the first couple of weeks in my office.
In both groups?
Well, so. Angry in the writing groups and disappointed in the homework groups. The disappointed because they were excited about the opportunity to write in a field that's not normally thought of as a writing field. And I really want to be in that discussion section. I'm sorry that's not how this is going to work. But then a lot of people who don't understand the merits of writing to learn. And so they were really horribly upset that I was undermining their likelihood of getting into Ross for business school because I wasn't letting them do problem sets.
Did you feel it was necessary or useful to share with them your reasoning or even some of the research to why you were using Writing to Learn?
I mean, it placated them a little bit, but it was clear that the people that came in, they were willing in the fall semester of their freshman year to step into my office and come that far out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
They weren't interested in being placated, really. To be honest.
So I'm curious if you've used what you've seen in the responses as a way to sort of assess what students are getting or not getting. Is that sort of a classroom assessment? And has that affected your teaching at all, either in the term or has it led to revisions in the course the next time you taught it? So in other words, looking at the responses, do you say, oh wow, there's lots of misconceptions here? Or is that just, yeah, I knew that because there's always misconceptions there. And so.
I haven't particularly changed much on the responses. We're doing a new prompt this semester that's also being used at Minnesota and Duke. And that one was jointly developed, the whole prompt and everything. And then we have written we, not me, they have written an assessment question that we're all also going to then give to our students sort of separately as part of either for them, part of their exams. For me, I'll use it as part of the quiz later. And so, you know, we will kind of look at that. But no, I haven't particularly, I mean, I've been teaching intro bio a long time, so I kind of know what they don't know. I am still sad that they can convince each other of wrong things. But I haven't looked at it that much and changed that much in terms of what their responses are. But I suppose we could.
I get a lot of feedback from the writing fellows because they're the ones that are reading them and evaluating them. So I don't read them all. I will download some and we'll do some practice grading of it early as that time is coming for the writing fellows. But they're the ones that have really given me good feedback on just even the prompt itself. So the prompt has changed slightly over the
prompts drift.
To be more specific on what we're asking, or to change slightly enough so it's a little different this term than last term. But so we've gotten better at writing the prompt for getting the answers we'd like. And as I mentioned, it did change how we are asking some of our homework questions now, so that every homework set has a more writing piece element to it than we have in the past. Just to get them from doing that in homework 1, oh, I'm writing. Not a memo, not a formal thing with revision, but still a little bit more on the explaining and writing about concept.
As you might expect, when kind of selecting the topics for the writing prompts, if you have experience in repetitive experience in teaching a particular class, you know what the tough spots are, and so that's where we're targeting, or where I was targeting. And so it's either I really want this takeaway message, and so I want to make sure they're writing on it as well as seeing it in class, or it's they regularly struggle with this concept, so let's make sure they write on it a couple of times. And so to that end, I haven't necessarily changed, like Laura said, what I'm doing in the classroom per se. There are a couple of spots here and there. One of my writing prompts, actually the one that I just completely rewrote, the old one asked them to work with a subsidy, and all I showed them in class was a tax, and a subsidy is an opposite of a tax, and it's actually a really easy flip, but no one could get it. So now there's an extra 10 minutes on my taxes lecture that we talk about subsidies. Right. So there's that sort of, they couldn't make that leap that I was hoping they could. But aside from that, I haven't really added too much.
So I have a question perhaps more towards the economics example, but it's really just about, do you have some sense of whether students are learning more or doing better? So for example, the non-writing assignments, are they improving in their exam? Because you said, hey, I took away all my problem sets and I replaced them with writing. You could imagine that your exam could be super well aligned with that. You could also imagine that that might actually undermine their exam success. So I'm kind of interested in what does that do to the overall assessment of learning in the course. And that's to all, but the structure was clear with economics, so it seems like at least that.
So I will say that I had visions of grandeur when I first designed the pilot semester. So I didn't, I knew one of the options was to do an honors conversion for the pilot semester where I had just a couple of sections. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to, not quite random, but still sort of randomly pull students. I'm going to grab these 2 discussion sections. You're going to be my writing discussion sections. And so when students were begging to switch, I didn't let it happen because I wanted to get a random sampling. I said it was a visions of grandeur because I have just not done anything with what you would imagine is a nice little set of data there. But I can say that exams from the previous semester to me using MWrite to that semester structurally did not change. Performances were pretty consistent. There wasn't, we looked at just rough statistics, right? Averages and medians, and across those 2 discussion sections that we're writing and the others, there wasn't a significant difference. Since then, I've started changing the way I'm also assessing. I've changed some of my exam structures to things. This has kind of inspired me to do a little bit more open response stuff on my exams. I'm not quite at the point of making my GSIs grade all the writing on exams, but I'm slowly easing them into that.
We also have to remember, Brenda now has been doing this in Stats 250. So her people are infiltrating the entire university. And so, you know, in my class now, I have at least one or two who used MWrite in Stats 250. Last year, I had somebody who'd used MWrite in Rachel's class. And so, you know, we're starting to get a few that have used MWrite. It's not as, you know, scary for many of them as it used to be.
We have some that have had MWrite before also, but I don't know which class.
It's probably Stats 250.
Yeah. They told me about it in the midterm evaluation. We talked about it. I haven't done it before.
I get the sense that you all have been doing this more or less continuously since you started. I'm wondering about that aspect for folks who don't teach the same course, you know, but every 4 semesters or something, right? And how that impacts both the, you know, the development of the idea and recruitment of the peer writing instructors.
That's a great question.
I can actually answer that because I am only using MWrite for the first time, but another instructor used it like a year ago in the fall. So there's been almost an entire year, I guess more than an entire year went by between the first iteration and this one. And you always kind of know who the strong students are. You can talk to your colleagues. That's how we pulled the writing fellows. But it's also worked, you know, where we had fellows the first time around. Many of them had also taken biology, so we jumped them over and they became fellows in biology or statistics, and there's a lot of back and forth. So we're able to draw from a different pool of fellows, and that's helped a lot. So some of them were able to continue being fellows, but in a different course. It's really cool. But yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. And I have a colleague who just didn't want to use it in the fall. We asked her, and you know, you can't force people to use it. So it didn't happen in the fall, and now it's happening again. So it creates a different set of problems, but I think they're manageable.
The prompts are pretty specific. So, I mean, you know, when I went to doing this in Yorgi's class in the fall, we just recruited students who had done well in a bio course before. The first time I did it in my course, I had a student who had been a fellow with Brenda the first time she did it. And there was the term, I think you were taking a break. And so I got Brittany, which was terrific because it's really nice to have an experienced writing fellow, especially the first time you're doing it. And so, you know, we'd come up with questions and, you know, one of the writing fellows would say, well, what should I do here? And I would look at Brittany and say, well, what'd you guys do in Stats 250? And, you know, you don't necessarily need the writing fellows to even have taken that class. I mean, they need to know that material. But presumably, once, you know, these are mostly intro level type courses, it's not that difficult to master the contents.
One of the things I told my writing fellows in the first 2 semesters, and admittedly I've kind of fallen out of that habit now, but in the first 2 semesters I looked at them and said, okay, you did really well in my Econ 101, but it's been a semester or 2. So if you're going to do this, you have to sit through my class. So you're going to sit in the back of the room and take it in like everybody else. And yeah, that's not fun to commit another 3 hours of your week to that, but you got an A, and that's great, but it's been a year, and so you need to freshen up a bit. I could see that being, you know, someone has taken a related course, but they're going to be writing fellow for you this semester. Okay, well, you're going to have to sit in the back of the room and pick up where the holes in your understanding.
And I guess I'll just add that 305, the training that they receive is just amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the support that I need. I could not do this without that extra support to be able to have that guidance, just generally in terms of how to evaluate writing. And they have, you know, a group me, and I'm on that too, to be able to answer things because I can't meet with them during those 305 times. And it was just a lot of good communication between yourself and then something learning. And then when you do it, even if you have the ability to do it 2 semesters in a row, to have that some mentoring and mentees of writing fellows has been very, very good.
Yeah, Larissa, who runs the course that the writing fellows take, is a really good resource too. So last semester, when we did the MWrite in the large enrollment intro bio, we encountered some plagiarism issues that we hadn't encountered in my smaller course for whatever reason. And so I said, I don't know, you know, what do we do? And so I think she went and got got some stuff and looked to see what Mitchell had done, and he must have encountered it.
I send a lot of students.
So having that information and that support, you know, I stole rubrics from Brenda on the grading of how to do grading of peer reviews and things like that. I think and somebody, I don't know, maybe Brenda, somebody had put together some extra links on the, you know, for more information about why writing is good, and, you know, and so, you know, we share all of those things, and those things are really helpful.
Do you guys keep archive of the previous terms students reviews so that, for example, use for the next semester, student can, even though the prompt might not be the same, but students can see some exemplary answers from previous time?
I have not.
Larissa, it had my writing fellows develop sort of like a short PowerPoint presentation, and as part of that, they put up, here's a revision, here's the original prompt, here's a revision. This one is not very good, this one is good, just showing how much had changed. And so they have some of those examples that she has helped them to build into sort of an intro to MWrite that they do at the beginning.
That's a great point. So the writing fellows, at least in Econ 101, I assume the same is true for y'all, they go into one of the early discussion section meetings. And so essentially I have 11 writing fellows and 11 discussion sections. And so each of them is loosely assigned a discussion section. I say loosely. They're assigned a discussion section. That's the discussion section they grade, so there's continuity across assignments. And that discussion section is the one that they show up to in the first or second meeting of the semester and use this presentation that they put together in the writing seminar to give the students at least some basic guidance.
Our writing fellows that's the logistics, trying to get them assigned to a lab they can actually attend, right, or go to either beginning or end, but they do visit twice for us, since right before the first prompt and then in between the first and second prompt, to give them some feedback on what they saw in the first one and get them excited about the next one coming up.
One of the structures of the way I have the writing written built into my class, I said earlier that there's some grading on actual content and quality, and what that ends up being is a random draw. I randomly draw one final draft, and I randomly draw one of their peer reviews, one of their iterations of peer reviewing. So for student, let's call her Jane Smith, we pull Jane Smith and we look at one of the times that she did peer reviews, one of the writing assignments where she did peer reviews. We look at the 3 different papers she responded to. Did she give really good, constructive, correct feedback? And then one of her writing assignments will pull her final draft and look at her final draft and give her a grade on, did she actually use economics correctly? Was this a well-formulated article? Was this an outstanding piece of work, or was this just adequate? And so there's some quality grading in that process. For the writing fellow side of things, what the students in my class don't know, but for the writing fellows, I tell them the first writing assignment is never part of the random draw. The first writing assignment, you will grade every single peer review, you will grade every single final draft, and give them a simulated score. If this was the random draw, we call it a spot check. If this was the spot check, this would have been a 3 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5. And here's why. So that they also have a benchmark on their first assignment. Thus, assignments 2 through 5, they'll have a better sense of where to go.
So, is plagiarism auto-detected, or is it reliant on the reviewers or the students?
Well, I don't know in your case, but in my case, the writing fellows were able to pick it up really easily, and then they were able to, they were right out of Wikipedia, and able to just pull it up and show it. So I don't know in your case what it was.
So plagiarism for us is kind of unique in the sense that it's not plagiarism in the framework that you might normally think of plagiarism. We normally think of somebody just going and copying a segment out of Wikipedia and using that as their paper. One of the things that I really stress with my students is attribution. I don't care if you're going to use 20 different sources to write a 400 word, not page, 400 word, it's a long writing problem. 400 word writing assignment, and you use 20 sources. I don't care as long as you're citing them correctly. That's not great writing necessarily, but as long as you're citing them correctly. And I stress that, and I stress that, and I stress that, and there's a complete, at the freshman level in particular, there's a complete misunderstanding of what proper citation is. There's also a laziness because they look at this as a low stakes assignment, and so why do I need to put that much effort in and make sure I'm citing properly? And so at this stage, this has been an iterative process each semester. So now I have Christine Modi from the Sweetland Writing Center come in on the first day of class and do a 20-minute presentation about proper attribution, right? Using sources in writing. And then I have them do a worksheet that's half just like class policy stuff and half, do you understand what constitutes plagiarism? Do you understand what proper citation is? And that's like a throwaway 5% of their grade. It seems like a lot, but I wanted enough to make sure everybody did it. And that way, A, they're faced with it, they have to see it, they have to look at it. B, even if they still ignore all of that and they find themselves before a Esreld nurse, I can at least say, wow, you did this worksheet and you said you knew what this meant, and then you went ahead and did it anyway. I don't want that to be the argument. I'd rather, and in fact, last year, over the last 2 semesters, I've sent, I don't know, 30 or 40 students to the dean for just poor citation practices, is really what it boils down to. This semester, I've sent no one.
I was also thinking if prompts do not change much semester to semester, then that type of plagiarism should be pretty easy to catch if a system can be looking for it. And that, I was really curious if there was any mechanism for that as well.
We don't have that yet.
But when they write their memo for 2018 with a November 2017 date.
That's right.
Really bad plagiarism.
But we found out that a number of these, I mean, we didn't have that many, but a few of them were actually students who had dropped last semester.
Yes.
And so they got through that first prompt. So they did have a version of it that they used. But each of the prompts are asking a slightly different set of questions so that that also can be checked.
On that subject of plagiarism, Sweetland has a very good website called Beyond Plagiarism. So if this is an issue or it becomes an issue if you adopt MWrite, there are a lot of resources. And then as Richard was saying, Christine Modi, my colleague, was instrumental in creating that website and is someone who can come and talk to your class.
And I'm still working with Christine on this, but we video recorded her presentation this past semester. So I'm hoping not to tax her time too much and figure out a way to integrate that into the worksheet on Canvas so that they have to watch that before they do the worksheet. And that way her time's not consumed by going into all of our classes.
Mitch, I was trying to resolve a comment you made earlier about so this notion that we're using writing to learn because we think it's going to improve the student outcomes. And you haven't yet seen any significant changes in sort of the course measurement of student average grades. And I'm thinking back to, it was a couple of weeks ago, we saw a session actually in this very room around research-informed instruction that seemed to suggest that when you focused on higher order learning, so synthesis versus just remembering content, they actually got better at the higher order learning, but they got worse at the lower order learning. And you made a comment about changing your assessment. Are you looking at changing it to see if you can piece out that, and we saw that graph sort of from complexity, writing complexity from just describing things to argumentative. Are you looking at changing to see if you can piece out that higher order learning?
I think you can categorize it that way. The way I've very casually thought of it is students often try to work a million old problems to see if they can learn some method, some process to solve the problem and then regurgitate it on an exam. And so I'm moving away from multiple choice in an effort to try to see opportunities for them to actually demonstrate their understanding of a concept without just regurgitating a method to a solution. And so I think in a sense that's trying to get to this, you know, let's focus on the concept and the intuition behind the concept and elicit that in response on the exams. So I haven't really looked to see, it's kind of hard because the assessments have changed so dramatically in that sense. Like half the exam is no longer multiple choice, it's now free response problems. So the averages have been going up. Is that a result of the entire classroom is writing, or is that a result of us really getting our feet under ourselves as we're transitioning from an all multiple choice exam to a half free response, half multiple choice? Maybe we're writing it too easy. So from that perspective, kind of in a time series, I'm seeing it go up, but I don't know what the reason for that is.
Well, that was a great question to end on. So thank you very much for that, John. And please join me in thanking Anne and Ginger.